Welcome back to TinyKeyHoleMinis. Today's project is inspired by this historical woman, Lillian Gilbreth. Did you know that she was the first woman engineer? Not only that, she invented the dustbin, what we call today the foot pedal trash bin. Lillian was big on hygiene and sanitation and cringed at the thought of having to touch the lid of a trash can. So she got creative. And today, I'll be creating the vintage dustbin. Hello, tiny friends. I'm Jolene, and I have been working on these little dustbins for about a week. And I'm really trying to figure out how to get these things to actually work. Now, this is the first model that I made. It's a bit smaller than 1/12 because I want to put it in that little vintage camper. I have an idea for that camper, and I thought this would be really great in that idea. So it has a little paper bag inside. Now, normally these vintage bins come with a bin that actually slips inside and had a handle so that you can take it out, but that's going to really affect how this little thing works. So I decided just to use a paper bag because I've seen that as well. This one works halfway. It does, but it doesn't. And it still needs some work. So I'm planning on remodeling this and trying something new. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get to this one today, but I will be completing 2 1/12 scale bins and see how much I can get done with those little things. This is the second one that I did. It actually works. The model is complete. I just need to paint it and add all the details to it. This is the 1/12 scale. I'll be making another one a little bit different, but similar to this one. For this one, I used wooden rounds for the top lid, and I switched up the hinge and the mechanism a little bit. I think because it's a little bit bigger, it works a little better. Now, I'm going to try to explain what I did as I go along today to create the other one. So if you want to try to make one, you can sort of see what I'm doing or what I've done. But honestly, I'm kind of learning as I go along. So I've made a lot of changes and I'm making a lot of changes as I go along. So that's kind of hard to explain exactly how to DIY this when that's going down. For the most part, I got this one working pretty well. The rod does get a little stuck, and that's because it moves from the connection on the foot pedal. It's looped in there, so it kind of has wiggle room, and sometimes it just kind of gets stuck a little. But I'm going to end up stuffing these in the end anyways, so being functional is actually pretty optional. To begin with, I'm using this brown craft paper that I get from the wrapping paper rolls or gift paper. They're starting to put this roll of brown craft paper in there to replace the cardboard roll that used to be there. And it works really well for my projects. So this piece is 1.5 by 6.5, and this will be the container of the bin. So I want to make sure that I'm wrapping it around 2 times so that it has a little bit of durability, but I'll be coating these things with wood glue afterwards. But you want the piece to be long enough so that it can wrap around itself and the outside seam will line up with the inside seam. So I'm just going to clip it for now and make a little mark with my pencil where the outside seam sits, just for reference later on. So I'm just tracing right where that seam is. Okay, so before I can actually make the cutout of the foot pedal, I need to prepare the size of the foot pedal. So I'm going to be using chipboard, and this is just a box. This is actually a little bit thicker than your pasta or cracker boxes. This came from a food box, but it was a heavy duty box, so it's a little bit stiffer and has a little more durability, but I will be doubling up the pieces. The foot pedal bar will be about 1/4 of an inch wide, and the length is going to determine on how big your bin is. You don't want it to touch the back of the bin, but you want it to go to the back of the bin and then extend out a little bit in the front. So I need to trim this piece down just a little bit to get to that 1/4 inch mark. But because I'll be doubling this up, I'm going to give myself about 2 3/4 inches, and that should be pretty good. Now, this will be the bar that goes across. It's kind of like the support bar for the foot pedal. And again, I'm giving myself about 2 3/4 inches long because I'm going to double it up. And then the size of this is about 1/2 of an inch wide, but really just depends on your bin. I just took my bin, set it down, and kind of traced around the two sides. And then this is going to fit inside the bin, and then the foot pedal will be attached to it. For the lid, I'm using the same box, and I took the bin, traced a circle, cut it out, and then I traced that circle. The circles that I cut out for my lid will be a little bit bigger than the template that I created from the bin, if that makes any sense. So you want to trace out your bin, then cut that circle out, and then trace that out, and it gets a little bit bigger. And then I have punched a little circle with a hole punch, and that's going to be what the hook is attached to on the lid, on the inside of the lid. I also have some smaller strips, and most of these will just be for added detail, but there will be one that will go around the lid for the lip of the lid. And the smaller ones are about 1/8 of an inch, a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, just depending. I'm going by eye, and the bigger one is about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bigger. You can use your own judgment if you want to add details like this. But for the lip that will go around the lid, it's going to be around 1/8 of an inch, depending on how thick your lid is. I'm going to use 3 circles, so I want it to line up around the top and just slightly hang over the bottom, and I'll show you when I get to that point. And then I'm going to use some of this to actually create the hinges. For the foot pedal, I'm using a wooden craft stick. It's a skinny stick, so it's about 1/4 of an inch wide, and then I'm just estimating the length. This one's about 1/2 of an inch long, and the top will vary. For the smaller bin, I use this creamer pull tab, and you saw I used the wooden rounds, so use your imagination for that. For the rods and the hinge bars, I'm going to use these bead pins with the eye hooks. I also have some without the eye hooks. I'm just going to be cutting these up. You can use any type of wire that you have. I'm also going to use a couple seed beads to lock them in place, and my Aleene's jewelry and metal glue, or you can use super glue. I have tacky glue. I have a toothpick. I have some wood glue. I'm using my Gorilla wood glue. And then I have various tools, scissors, needle nose pliers, my little hand drill, my little poker tool, my craft cutter, my little tiny scissors, nail file or some sandpaper. I'm also going to use my little needle file that is kind of round on one edge, and it just kind of curves the foot pedal slightly to go around the bin. Okay, I'm going to begin with my lid and just begin cutting out these circles. I'm using my curved scissors because they're really helpful when cutting curved edges and circles. So I'm just going to cut this piece out and measure it just to give you an idea. Now this circle measures right in between the 1-inch mark. Once I got all 3 of my circles cut out, I'm going to use my tacky glue to glue them together. And if there's a side that has a coating on it or any color, I like to glue those pieces together so it doesn't interfere with the painting or any of the super glue that I add later on. I'm just going to use my tacky glue to glue these pieces together. Don't worry if they're not all exactly the same size. You can lightly trim them down and create a more even edge later on after they're all together and dried. You just want to be careful you don't trim too much because you still need your lid to be slightly bigger than the top of your bin. For this lid, I'm going to go with one of these plastic pull tabs, and I have 3 different styles. I'm not sure which one yet, but I'm thinking I'm going to do this flatter one. It's a bit more flatter, and I'm kind of aiming for the photo that I'm referencing. So I'm just carefully cutting off the ring tab, and you just want to be super careful. If you have a really sharp blade, it should cut through like butter. But again, just be super careful you don't cut yourself with this. I have 3 different styles. This one's more of a flat one. I would normally use this to create a little plate. I have one that has it kind of looks like a bowl. I put an additional piece on that came from a pill dispenser to give it that bottom. And then this one's also kind of like a dome. So I like all 3. It's sometimes difficult to decide, so I'm just playing around to see which one I'm going to go for. I do like this one, and I did begin with this, but I switched it up to go with the more flatter one. So you'll see that later on, but the process is going to be the same. So now that my circles are dried, I'm just going to trim right around the edge, just a little bit, just to even it up a bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to end up gluing the trimming around this, and that'll help even up the edge a bit. Okay, I'm going to cut out the area for the foot pedal, and I'm just laying it down, tracing it out. I'm going up about 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to go ahead and just cut the 2 sides first. This is going to cut through both walls of the bin. So once I get my 2 sides cut, then I can go ahead and kind of bend the piece upward to make that crease. I'm not going to cut it. I'm just making sure that my pedal will work without interfering and touching the walls. I'm going to open it up, and now I've got 2 holes. I'm just using my craft knife to cut the top off. This way I don't have any creases, or it's sometimes difficult to cut an area like this with scissors. So using the craft knife just makes it a bit easier. And now I can go ahead and line them up and begin to glue this piece closed. Okay, I'm going to use tacky glue for this, and I'm just going to do the first section, one section at a time. I'm just going up to the opening and putting a nice smooth thin layer of tacky glue, applying it with my toothpick. Now I really want to take my time with this part because I got to make sure that both of my edges are lined up evenly. The roll is nice and tight, and the 2 walls are touching each other, and the openings are both lined up correctly. So I'm only doing 1/2 of this at a time, and I'm making sure to press the 2 pieces down nice and tight so there's no gaps in between the 2 pieces. and that it's rolled up nice and tight. My outside seam should line up with my inside seam. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more glue to the rest of it. And again, just take my time while laying it down. This part's a little bit easier because you pretty much already have lined it up, but you still have to slowly lay this down. Make sure there's no gaps. Roll it nice and tight, lay it down nice and tight, a little at a time, and press it down as you're going around. And once you have it closed, you can go ahead around the whole bin and just press it down nice and flat so that it's nicely attached to each other and there's no gaps. And that's that. I'm going to go ahead and add the larger strip onto the bottom. I'm going to let about half of the strip hang down over the edge. That'll extend the opening for the foot pedal and raise the bin just a little bit. While that's drying, I'm going to move on to the lid. And getting started can be a little finicky, but once you get that first section down, it is pretty simple from that point on. So I'm just doing a small section at a time. I'm using tacky glue for this, making sure that the top edges are lined up evenly with each other and that the bottom just slightly hangs over the edge. I'm cleaning up any excess glue as I go along because I don't want that to interfere with the closing of the lid. I did make the strip long enough to go around itself twice, and if it doesn't quite make it the second round, that's okay. I'll be covering this up with wood glue later on. And if it's too wide, then I just trim it down a little later before I actually apply the wood glue. While that's drying, I'm going to apply the smaller strip around the bottom of the can. And this time I'm actually lining it up with the bottom ledge. So you'll see a double panel on the bottom. I don't need to extend it anymore. This is the perfect height. So I'm just adding this around from one end of the opening to the other, just like I did with the larger piece, and then I'll trim it down. I only need to go a single round with these pieces because it's just for added decor. It doesn't really need to have any support. For the bottom support bar, this actually measures 1/2 inch by 2 3/4. And I'm just going to use my round tip scissors to cut this out, giving it a nice little curve that will go right inside the bottom of the can. And then I'm going to double it up. So I'm just going to add some tacky glue, lay it down, and then I'll trim the piece out after it dries. For the pedal bar, I'm just sticking it in the opening all the way to the back. Now, when I put this together, it's not going to touch the back, but it's okay to touch the back now because I'm going to end up trimming down the front end a little later. This measures 1/4 by 1 1/4 inches, and I'm going to need 2 pieces. So I'm going to cut a second piece and trim it down to make sure they're the same size. The piece for the hinge is going to measure 1/4 by 3 1/2, and this is the brown craft paper. I'm also going to use a round skinny stick. You can use a toothpick, it's the same size. And I just need it to be long enough to wrap around twice. I'm going to make 2 little tubes, and I'm making sure that they wrap around twice. So I'm going nice and tight as I'm wrapping this, and I'm just taking my time. Coming to the end, I'm going to snip off the excess, glue it closed, just roll it nice and tight, and then remove it from the stick before it dries. You should have 2 little skinny tubes like this, and this is what they should look like. I'm going to let these dry completely before coming back to them. Going on to the lid, this is what it looks like. I am going to need to trim that edge down slightly, but the hinge is going to be glued right on the ledge, right in the very back. So I kind of made it to where the seam lines up with the opening where the foot pedal is going to be, and I kind of used that as my guide. And then I want the hinge to go right over the seam. So I'm doing my bigger hinge first, and I'm just applying a little bit of tacky glue on the edge and then on the hinge itself. Then I'm going to carefully add it. And I'm making sure that the lid is on the can so that I know it's going to lay correctly and open and close, and it's where it needs to be. Once I got this on, I'm just going to make some adjustments, clean up any excess glue because I don't want that to interfere with the way it opens and closes later on. So once this is attached, I'll remove it, clean up any excess glue. I'm making any necessary adjustments, and I'm going to dry fit it again to make sure it's sitting in place where it needs to be. Now I'm going to work on the second tube, and I'm just going to cut that right in half. Now I have an uneven cut, so I'm going to flip that around and put my uneven edges on the outside so that the more even edges are facing the middle hinge and it lines up a little better, because later on I'll be covering the edges with wood glue and you're not going to notice that they're uneven. While I have my lid on, I'm going to apply the 2 hinges on either side and just make some adjustments. This way I know they're all lined up together. Once I get them on there where I want them to be, I'm going to carefully remove the lid, and I needed to make some more adjustments to this one. So I need to make sure that it's still lined up, and then I'm going to set them aside and let them dry. Okay, I've got my basic structures completed and they're dried. I'm going to go ahead and apply the wood glue. Now I'm making sure to apply a thin, even layer, and I'm going to do this about 2 to 3 times depending on how much it needs, but I'm going to let each layer dry in between. And I'm also going to run it around the edge, the lip of the lid, but I have to do this in sections, so this does take some time, and this is where I need to be really patient because this stuff has to be dried completely before adding anything to it or painting. I'm going to move on to the mechanism while those are drying. And right now I'm just trimming down my support bar to make sure that both pieces are nice and even. This might be where it gets a little choppy because this is where most of the learning process happened. So I'm going to try my best to explain everything. I am using the foot pedal bar and I'm just tracing the width of it right in the middle of the support bar. And now I'm going to drill 2 holes, one on each of the outside of the line. And I'm just trying to make sure that they're lined up as even as I can get them. Because again, I'm not measuring. I'm just eyeballing everything for the most part. But I did measure things for you guys to get a better idea if you want to make this. Okay, I'm using a straight pin without the eye hook, and I just snipped off the little flat head, and now I'm going to stick it through one of the holes. I want it to sit up about 1/4 of an inch, but I need about 1/2 of an inch sticking up so that I can create a loop. And then I'm slightly bending it and measuring it. I'm going to pop this through the holes and face it upwards. And then I'm going to go ahead and create 2 loops. It's best to trim your pieces before creating the loops. This way you're sure to have an even height on your loops. I didn't do that here, so I learned a lesson. So now I have a little bracket that will allow the foot pedal to teeter-totter back and forth. I'm going to add a little bit of this jewelry and metal glue to the very bottom and glue it down. I'm going to cover the bar up with a little piece of the brown craft paper, and I'm using tacky glue, and I'm just applying it to add a little more support. It'll help keep the bar in place and give it a little more durability throughout time. Now I'm just going to file the edges of the foot pedal, and I'm just slightly rounding the corners just a little bit. I'm using a needle file that has straight edges. It's kind of like a square file, just to give the foot pedal a little more design. So I'm adding 2 grooves in the petal. Last, I'm going to use that needle file that I showed you earlier just to give a slight curve on one side of the foot pedal. This will help the foot pedal sit nicely against the bin. Okay, I'm taking a piece of the bead pin, measuring 3/4 of an inch. You can use a piece of wire for this as well. This is going to sit in between the 2 pieces of the foot pedal. This will be the pin that will make the pedal swivel back and forth. So I'm just going to use tacky glue for this, and I'm laying the pin down a little less than halfway or a little more than halfway on one side. It'll be actually the back side. Once I get this nice and straight, I'm just going to lay the second piece over it and clip the 2 pieces together until it dries. Okay, so this is where I'm switching out the lids. I've already prepared this second lid. I've covered it with the wood glue and it's all ready to go. I just need to attach it. For the can, I have also added a little bit of trimming around the opening, and then I also added a little bit of wood glue to raise that trimming just a little bit more, just to give it some more added detail. Okay, my foot pedal is ready to be attached to the bracket, and I had to open up one of the loops so that I can slide it in, and now I'm just going to close it tightly. I want to have a little bit hanging over on each side, but I am going to trim off just a little bit so it's not hanging too far over. I just need enough space on each side for the little seed bead. Although it's probably not going to go anywhere, I just want to add the seed beads to lock it into place. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the jewelry and metal glue or super glue, just a tiny little dab on each end, and slide the seed bead right into place. And I'm just making sure that it still works and the glue didn't stop that from happening. Okay, I need to make a little hook that will be attached to the back of the foot pedal that the rod can hook into, and that will allow the lid to open and close when the foot pedal is pressed down. So I'm creating a little loop on one of the pins. You can use one of the pins that have a hook already. I'm making an L-shaped bend, and then I'm taking the other end and bending it the opposite direction. And it's kind of confusing, but you'll be able to see it a little better once I put it into place. Okay, remember this hook will be sitting in the back of the foot pedal along the back side of the can, and take note to which direction I have it facing. So the hook, the loop, and the front piece are both facing the same direction. When you insert it into the bottom of the can, they'll be facing the right side of the can, which will be your left side when you're facing the front of the trash can. Now I'm going to create the hook that will be on the inside of the lid. This is where the rod will connect to. And I'm just making a little hole in that tiny circle that I punched out with my hole puncher. Now I'm placing the circle where I want it to sit on the lid, and I'm using my poker tool to make a little mark. I'm going to go in with my drill and just drill a little hole. I'm not drilling all the way through, just enough so that the little hook will sink inside. I'm going to create a tiny little hook, and I'm going to be dry fitting this to see if I need to trim it down. I don't want it to be sticking out from the lid. I want the little loop to be sitting right on the circle. So once I get the size I need and I know it's not going to stick out from the lid, I'm going to add a little bit of that Aleene's jewelry and metal glue. I'm also going to use a little bit of tacky glue as well. I am going to add a little bit of the Aleene's jewelry and metal glue to the hole. And then I'm just going to place this little hook right inside that hole. I'm going to add a little extra metal glue right around the outside of the hook. I'm going to push it down, make sure it's nice and snug, and then I'll just clean up any excess glue. Okay, for the pedal mechanism, I've attached the rod and I've hooked it through from the back to the front. There's a little ledge inside from the trimming, and that's where the bottom of the support bar is going to rest. And now this is where it's either going to work or it's not going to work. I'm taking the rod and I'm giving it a slight bend straight back, and I'm bending it right at the top of the can. And this is where I'm having the problem with the smaller can. So if your rod is too long, it's not going to properly work, and you'll have to shorten it up or tighten it up. You want to make sure that your pedal is all the way down in the front so that it's at its highest point in the back, and then go ahead and bend it at a slight angle right at the top of the can. You do want to close your hook. Don't leave it open or it may pop off the pedal. So close it, but don't over close it. Now it's time to put the hinge on, and I've curved the hinge slightly since the hinges are on a curve. This will allow the lid to open and close without any interference. If I were to leave a straight pin in there, the lid would have an issue opening and closing. So I gave it a very slight curve. I'm going to use a little bit of wood glue to close up the openings, and I'm going to do 2 rounds. So after the first round dries, I'll come back in with a second round, and you won't even know that it's there after it's painted. It'll just look like one piece. So I'm pushing in the pedal mechanism. Now I can't glue the bottom into place yet. I have to hook it through the top. Now if you glue the bottom in first and try and hook it in, you might rip the hook off of the pedal. So before you glue it in properly, you need it to be able to move around while you're doing this part. This is the tricky part and may get a bit frustrating, so just take your time and don't give up. You may need to make several adjustments before you get it right. So the angle section of the bar is probably a little smaller than 1/4 inch. And then I have bent the top of the bar to my right, which is facing the left side of the can. Once I know it's working properly, I'm pushing my support bar all the way to the front as far as it'll go so that the back of the pedal bar does not touch the back of the can. So you want to make sure of that. And now I'm just going to close the hook. And this is important that you do this before gluing your support bar into place, or you may rip your hook from the pedal board. So you want to do this first. So you want to make sure that it's working properly before you go ahead and glue this bar into place. So just checking to see if it still works. After making some adjustments, I've had to make several adjustments for this. So this is how I know. Now, inside underneath the can where the original can ends, there's a little lip there before I added the trimming, and that's where the support bar sits. I'm going to make sure that I have the support bar pushed all the way forward to the front of the can and that my pedal bar is not touching the back. I'm applying my tacky glue on both sides and putting it into place. I'm not going further than that little edge, and I'm just going to squeeze it a little bit on the sides just to give it a little pressure, and then apply a little extra glue on the bottom. From the bottom of the rod where I connected it to the pedal board to the top of the can where I angled it probably measures about 1 inch. I did have a suggestion of maybe using magnets and adding magnets into the mechanism to make the lid work properly. I like the way that sounds, so I'm going to try to figure that out with this smaller can. So I'll come back to that. But all that I have left to do is add the pedal and then to customize the cans. They work properly. I'm happy with the way they're working. Again, it was completely optional to have them functional because I'm going to stuff them. But this is what the inside looks like. They probably won't work properly while the trash bag is inside and it's full, but I'm still going to go with that idea. I'm going to add the pedal to this, and then these 2 bins are going to be completed as far as the structure. So that is all I have for you today, tiny friends. I am going to attach the pedal to the pedal board as I'm saying goodbye, and I'm just going to use a little bit of tacky glue to attach this together. I hope you have enjoyed this project today, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and click that like button, and don't forget to let me know what you thought about these in the comments below. Unfortunately, I am out of time, so please come back to see part 2 for my favorite part of how I customize and detail and fill these trash bins. As always, I'd like to thank you all for subscribing, and welcome to all my new subscribers. Thank you all so much for your support. If this is your first time visiting my channel and would like to see more of my miniature creations and follow along on my miniature journey, please subscribe and don't forget to hit that top bell notification button to be notified every time I upload a new project so you don't miss out. This has been a challenging project, but I am very happy with the results. So until next time, tiny friends, you all have a lovely day, and I will see you all on the mini side.